Before COVID, you were a frequent visitor to Australia. Can you understand why a country like ours that contributes just over 1% of global emissions and reducing is tearing itself apart over climate policy while global emissions are increasing?
Yes, I think I can because I live in the same kind of country. Look, most of the rich world is incredibly worried about climate change. And if you look at most of the stories that you hear almost every day, I can understand it. I can understand why people like Greta Thunberg and many others are just terrified. You hear about one flood after another, one storm after another, one heat wave after another, and you get the sense that this is the end of time. A new study from OECD shows that 60% of everyone in the OECD now believes that global warming will likely lead to the extinction of mankind. Now, this is totally wrong compared to the science. That's not what the UN Climate Panel is telling us at all. But if you believe this is the end of time, then obviously nothing else matters, and you're willing to throw everything in the kitchen sink at this. Of course, you're still going to fail. You're still going to spend money really badly, but I understand the sentiment.
But it's not just political. It's not just media people hyping this up. There are scientists get involved in this. For instance, we know that the Australian environment is very well adapted to droughts and flood and fire. A lot of our fauna and flora wouldn't survive without regular bushfires and droughts. It's part of their life cycle. They've adapted to it. Yet we have people promulgating theories now that fires and droughts are going to make all of our mammals extinct. It's not fires and drought making them extinct. It's European pests like cats and foxes.
I think that's probably a very good argument. I focus more on the human side, and just to give you a couple of senses. So we've talked a lot about heat waves in these last couple of weeks. I know not in Australia, but here in Europe and the US. And it makes for great TV. It's obviously very scary. And remember, heat waves are actually really dangerous. You should take care. You should go inside. You should drink lots of fluid. You should be in air-conditioned rooms. But it's something we know how to deal with. And almost everywhere in the rich world, heat deaths are actually declining. Why? Because we know how to adapt. But cold deaths are increasing, and cold deaths vastly outweigh heat deaths. So there is about 9 times as many cold deaths as there are heat deaths globally. And why do cold deaths outweigh and increase? Because it is really costly to actually keep yourself warm in winter. And that is where climate policies actually make a detriment to the whole approach, because climate policies make energy more expensive, which means that you can't keep your home as well heated. We know this from the US, for instance, by seeing fracking reducing their energy costs dramatically. It saved about 11,000 people from dying from cold deaths every year. Now, with prices going back up, that means another 11,000 people will be dying. But we don't talk about it because it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a long stretch of the winter. We need to be honest about, yes, there are many problems in this world. Climate is one of them. But because we're so focused on just climate, we forget all these other and often much more easily tractable problems and solutions. And that means we end up wasting lots of resources, not really fixing the big problems.
That's what I love about your research and your rational analysis, because you recognise there are many, many moving parts and many priorities for human civilization, and you've got to make smart, rational choices. For instance, I've been looking recently at a lobby group in Australia who are trying to cancel any advertising by fossil fuel companies, and they liken it to tobacco companies. They say fossil fuels kill more people than tobacco. Now, the point here is, what has developed our prosperity over the past century? On what have we founded modern civilization, jobs, education, healthcare, and prosperity? Surely nothing has been more important in that than cheap, affordable, reliable energy.
This is obvious, and anyone who is honest to the historical record will obviously recognize that. This is what happened with the Industrial Revolution. We stopped just being dependent on our own muscles and a little bit of draft animals and a tiny bit of wind and water energy from our windmills. we started being able to access much more energy. Right now, the average person in the rich world has access to energy that's equivalent to 100 people working for you 24/7. That's an amazing achievement. That's, of course, why we love everything we love about civilization. It gives us warmth, cool, food, transportation, all the other things that matter. And we forget that most people actually want to have that, not just in rich world, but in the rest of the world. That's, of course, what drove the Chinese wonder in the last 30 years. They got incredibly rich, mostly off the back of lots and lots of coal. And that's why they're now the world's leading emitter by a very large margin. And remember, everybody else in the developing world, so India and rest of Africa, for instance, are looking enviously to China. They want to do the same thing. We come along and say, oh, you know what, you guys, you should go to renewables. And now some renewables is actually a smart thing. For instance, solar panels in summer providing energy in the middle of the day is actually a smart thing in California because it is exactly when you need the most power for your air conditioner. But it doesn't deliver power 24/7, which is why most rich countries don't get their energy from solar and wind. Remember, the OECD only gets about 3% of its energy from solar and wind. We love to talk about it, but we actually rely vastly on fossil fuels. And even by mid-century, the International Energy Agency estimates that by mid-century, the world will still get the majority of its energy from fossil fuels, even if everybody keeps all of their climate promises that they've made so far. So the reality is we're going to be dependent on fossil fuels for a very long time. The trick is partly to switch from coal to gas, which is much, much cleaner, and of course, dramatically ramp up investment in green energy so that we will find the technologies that will take over from fossil fuels in a way that is not as expensive as it has been for the rich world, and so also will be attractive for poor countries like India and Africa.
Bjorn, thanks so much for joining us again and campaigning for sanity and a rational approach.
Thank you.